Hello and welcome to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carrad Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 1980 movie titled Heaven's Gate. This movie was directed by Michael Cimino, and it's 3 hours and 36 minutes long. And the stars of the movie are Kris Kristoffersen, Jeff Bridges, Christopher Walken, Isabelle Huppert, Sam Waterston, Brad Dourif, Isabelle Huppert, and Michael Gough. Now, this movie was often billed as one of the worst movies ever made in cinematic history. Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate is filled with a cornucopia of problems, and it was not necessarily the film itself, but what happened during and after the film was released. For one thing, even though the movie is about 3.5 hours long, it is not to be taken very lightly. This one demands that you have to sit through these long, excruciating hours, because if you miss one moment, you miss a substantial amount of what the story is about, and believe me, you will be lost. The plot is surprisingly quite simple, as it follows through the years between 1870 to 1903. The opening scene is about 40 minutes long, as our journey begins at Harvard University, as two alums, James Averill, played by Kris Kristoffersen, and his friend Billy Irvin, played by John Hurt, had graduated and are on their way to the workforce. Averill has moved to Wyoming in the Johnson County area and is now serving as the marshal. Coming into this country, European immigrants from Germany and other Slovak countries are settling into the territory as cattle barons, and these cattle barons in the area are now trying to get these European immigrants out of Johnson County, as tensions keep going from bad to worse by the minute. And while this is happening, over 100 names were placed on a death list led by the statistic cattle herder by the name of Frank Canton, played by Sam Waterston, in which he plans to kill them off by recruiting mercenaries, and this engages into a ruthless and very, very violent showdown. The violent, brutal shootout was, actually based on the real incident with the Johnson County Wars. If you want more information, go to Wikipedia, and it should be there. Included in the script is the awkward and unnecessary love triangle between Averill and an enforcer in the area by the name of Nate Champion, played by Christopher Walken, and a brothel madam named Ellie Watson, played by Isabelle Huppert. It's up to Averill to join forces with these impoverished settlers to take down Canton's men using siege machines, while Canton's men are using more advanced makeshift fortifications to their advantage. So both parties eventually suffer terrible casualties until Canton comes in to break up the carnage. The film ends when Averill, Ellie, and an entrepreneur who owns a roller skating rink called Heaven's Gate, named John Bridges, played by Jeff Bridges, as they prepare to leave Johnson County for good. But then Canton and his remaining men kill off Bridges and Ellie, as Averill decides to kill off Canton while he grieves over his lover's body. And then we shift into the year 1903, as Averill has now settled a quiet, serene lifestyle in Rhode Island, as he is seen in his very luxurious yacht with a lady by his side. I'm assuming that it's his wife, as she is lying there onto the couch, all glitzy and glamoury with her feathers and her advanced little cigarette with the little black pipette. I don't know what it's called. I'm not a smoker, so, you know, don't ask me. Eddie comes over and he ignites a flame right next to her cigarette. As he lets her sit back and smoke, he closes the door on her, and he returns home. He returns to the deck as the yacht steams ahead. So that's kind of like how the story ends. I think what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go over to the list of some of the problems that happened during the filming of this movie. I have kind of made a list of all the bad stuff that in the making of Heaven's Gate. Well, not all of them, but just some of the more important ones. First of all, one of the biggest weaknesses in the film is that the film went way over budget limit due to Michael Cimino's controlling ways to make this movie absolutely perfect. Coming off, I guess, from the success of his previous project, The Deer Hunter, Cimino wanted to make what was to be the ultimate project, which in the result turned out to be the ultimate failure. He even went as far as to arbitrarily destroy sets and was constantly hiring and firing crew members frequently during the film's running. The film skyrocketed to about $40 million, and it was originally supposed to be a 5-hour film when first presented by United Artists, which was eventually sold to MGM because, thanks to Cimino and his incompetence, United Artists was about a smidgen close to being bankrupt. I mean, this movie almost took out United Artists for good, and eventually they had to sell themselves to MGM. But not only was this affected United Artists, I mean, they couldn't really produce another project till like years later. This movie did succeed in one thing. It destroyed Michael Cimino's career as a film director. I mean, United Artists almost went victim of becoming bankrupt, and then Cimino was generally out of work for 5 years. In addition to that, animal abuse was reported, as many animals were eventually destroyed during the making of the production, and they include such strenuous activities like cockfights, slaughtered chickens, and physical abuse took place during the filming of the movie, which eventually led to the American Humane Society to monitor animals in films to make sure no harm was done. And this has kind of like has happened since then. You know, organizations like the American Humane Society, PETA, and whatnot, they have all have entered the fray during the making of the movies to make sure no animals were hurt. There was even once a rumor, I'm not sure if this is true or not, but I think I also once heard that a horse was exploded during the making of the movie. It's not really justified, but I wasn't there, so but the way I saw how the cruelty of animals were in this movie, it comes as a no surprise. Real characters that were in the film, including Sheriff James Averill, Nate Champion, Ella Watson, and Frank Canton, those were real characters, even though the story was semi-fictional. It could have been based on true events, but these are like the real people that were. These are real characters. Averill, Champion, Watson, and Canton. Tom Noonan, who played Jake in the movie, has also cited claims that Cimino was not only a barbarian to the animals while filming, but they also said he was abusive to the cast and crew, and even held a gun at him over a dispute. Cimino kind of like ran the set like as if he was a boot camp instructor, as the cast had to be trained to do certain regiments for a scene to work. According to actor Alan Keller, back in 1986, he sued United Artists for an injury he sustained when a rifle he used exploded. Cimino's perfection put the production behind schedule. I mean, if that isn't a way to kill one's career, I don't know what would. And Cimino was actually on the brink of being fired from the movie, and was supposed to be replaced by Norman Jewison, but it was rumored that he did not like the script at all, so he rebuffed from ever considering filming this movie. And boy, what a reputation this movie has, and not a positive one, I might add. I mean, aside from destroying the directing career of Michael Cimino, the grossly overweight budget, which almost bankrupted United Artists, and animals are physically abused from during the filming. Talk about a what else could go wrong predicament Heaven's Gate has had 34 years after its release, and it is still condemned by critics today as one of the worst films ever made. Sure, okay, my opinion is that even though it had flaws, I couldn't pass it off as being a masterpiece by any means. There are some good things that make the film actually quite noteworthy. For instance, the plot is really not that difficult to point out. A conflict ensues in Johnson County, Wyoming, as immigrants attempt to settle on this land, and it's up to the wealthy American settlers to try and stop them. However, Cimino just goes as far as to throw everything at you right where it begins, where James Averill and Billy Irvine, played by Kris Kristoffersen and John Hurt, they had graduated from Harvard and were partying it out. It's an epic moment as you see the grads, they're dancing, getting drunk, and it's a good way to get to know the characters at first, but as the film progresses, things start to drain out. One of the many letdowns in the story, and like I said, I've mentioned already plenty, was the editing. And one of the annoying things is that the scenes had a tendency to start and stop whenever it feels like giving, and it's an unnatural thing to look at. Surely that made me cringe quite a lot. Also, many scenes from the script should have been discarded completely, as many of them were just a total waste of space. And if the editing wasn't so unprofessional, it would have made the film worthy of its epic quality. The sound editing was also quite appalling, as all the noise in the background was so overpowering that you just can't decipher what's being said in the dialogue by the actors. And the sad part was that the sequences were pretty much ruined because of this. Now, I know I've said a lot of negativity about the movie. There is actually a positive light under the tunnel behind this rant. The saving grace behind this flawed epic was the struggles between the association and the poor European immigrants, as it actually paints a fine picture of just how hostile and unfriendly the Americans were during the Western frontier. I mean, it was not all glitz and glamour and Little House on the Prairie bonanza, that type of cliche like you see in a lot of Western epics. This one actually shows just how mean-spirited, hostile, and maybe even borderline racist these frontiersmen really were. The battles were quite intense, and it's a shame that the only thing we know when first viewing is through the verbal lashings behind the set, and this is what most people talk about rather than the film itself. So I think if people should stick their heads from under the gutter, maybe you might enjoy this film and might accept it. Okay, never judge a book by its cover, as the old saying goes. Thank you for listening, and please feel free to write back to me and subscribe to my channel. This is Eric Wright, signing off.